and welcome back for part two. The next significant mention of the Emmett Till case from Jet magazine comes on October 27th, 1955. At this point, it's fallen off the cover of Jet magazine, but it has a little snippet inside where it discusses his father. They mention that his father's fate was brought to light by a Mississippi newspaper which said that he was executed on July 2nd, 1945 for murder and rape. This was in stark contrast to what was reported earlier, that his father had died in World War II. The fact that this unflattering evidence was dug up and then published by a Mississippi newspaper suggests to me that they were looking to defend their collective reputations in some way. Perhaps the idea that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree was the idea. Dad was a rapist. Kid was probably a rapist. Probably got what he deserved, may have been the general idea. Now, this was followed the very next week with an issue from Jet magazine where they heard from the men who were in Italy and the black soldiers who were with him. And they had a lot to say concerning his death in Italy. They contend that Private Louis Till was railroaded to his death for rape and murder in a strange hush-hush atmosphere in Italy. Army records, according to Mississippi Senator James, show that Till was hanged on July 2nd for the murder of an Italian woman and the rape of two others. But former non-commissioned officers and men in the Jim Crow 397th Port Battalion, which was composed mostly of Chicago draftees, told a different story. They said that Till and three other GIs were whisked away from the unit and carried to a stockade in another area, and later all of Till's records were taken from the company, and none of the outfit's Negro leaders were allowed to see any material on the case. One former sergeant, "This was the first time during our overseas stay that we were plainly ignored." Another Negro non-commissioned officer said, "Till never confessed to the crime, and we felt he was innocent. It's inconceivable that a big, playful fella could be a criminal. If facts stood up, the Army should not have been so hush-hush about killing him." And so that does, of course, raise a lot of questions. Another former corporal said, "A group of 127 of our Negro non-coms or non-commissioned officers were busted following North African riots when white MPs sought to enforce non-fraternization bans." That means they were trying to keep them away from, essentially, white people. "We were known as the most militant unit in Italy, but we established new tonnage records in unloading ships under fire." Described as a 210-pound, 6-foot giant who, quote, licked every man in the outfit with boxing gloves, Till was called friendly and easygoing. He was a fun lover and got into mischief, but nothing serious. So another former war buddy remembered Till buying the ring in Casablanca for his wife. This is the ring, of course, that showed up in the murder trial. So, as an individual who's a member of the modern army, who's witnessed how easy it is to carry out injustice inside of the military, I have zero issue accepting this version of events. Of course, it's simply the word of the men who came back against the official record, and there's no real way to prove this. All we can really prove is that he was executed on July 2nd for rape, but here are accounts saying that that wasn't right. So this brings up several interesting dynamics. At first, I had no idea the U.S. military executed U.S. soldiers during World War II. I thought this was lynching, and at first I thought that it was obviously lynching by another name. But then I found this article. It is a Wikipedia article, however, it is based on several official records. It states 141 soldiers were executed over a 3-year period by the U.S. military. Now, my guess is that the U.S. Army at war did not have the time or the resources to deal with the logistics of transporting or imprisoning a certain type of criminal, so they simply executed them. Now, as a soldier myself, I shouldn't be surprised by this, and I shouldn't be surprised I never heard this information, but quite honestly, I really was. Now, as I said before, the reason why I started this project, this Black in Time YouTube channel, was to examine how African Americans gained the ability to speak for themselves, and when they did, what types of things did they say, and how did this contrast sometimes with the mainstream accounts. So in order to do this, I first went back to Life magazine. Life magazine was the biggest publication of the time, and I wanted to see what it is that they were saying about the Emmett Till case, if anything. So he's mentioned for the first time on September 12th, and his mom was pictured on page 45. There's nothing in the table of contents. The same issue of Jet magazine, it was featured on the cover, and it was given 5 pages. And of course, it was featured in the table of contents, with specifics given to the brutality and then the number of people who came out to Chicago to bear witness to the body. Life magazine also mentions the case on October 3rd. So in this issue, it's given 3 entire pages of the issue, as well as a photo essay and an artist rendering of the events taking place in court. They mentioned that the defense relied heavily on the claim that the body did not actually belong to Emmett Till, and that the jury readily accepted this. Prior to reading this article, I wasn't fully aware of why the men acquitted these individuals, given that they admitted to kidnapping them, but that's what they relied on. Oh, this isn't the right body. So the article does emphasize that the author views this as a clear example of racial hatred, and mentions the defense claimed the entire ordeal is an attempt by outsiders to destroy the way of life enjoyed by white Southerners. So I feel that this coverage was very fair, and it also emphasized exactly what was wrong with the entire situation. The difference, of course, is in the amount of time and energy given to this article compared to the black magazines at the time. This is as much as they really got out of it. 3 pages in an article right after the trial is over. So on the October 10th issue, once again, Emmett Till is given 2 mentions, a photo of his mom at a protest, and then there's an editorial dedicated to Emmett. And then that's it. You don't really see the Emmett Till case appear again in time in Life magazine. Now, this editorial is very beautifully written, and I'll just read a couple of excerpts. In Mississippi, the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till still goes unpunished. It will be punished nevertheless, for there is a higher law than Mississippi's. Emmett Till was a child. One of the South's tradition is the religion of Jesus, who said, "But who shall offend me? One of these little ones which believe in me?" So men can be forgiven for prejudice as a sign of ignorance or imperfect understanding of their religion. No righteous man can condone a brutal murder. Those in Sumner and elsewhere who do condone it are in far worse danger than Emmett Till ever was. He had only his life to lose, and many others have done that, including his soldier father, who was killed in France fighting for the American proposition that all men are equal. Those who condone a deed so foul as this are in danger of losing their souls. Of course, this is before they discovered that his father was actually hanged by the U.S. military. It said, "Sleep well, Emmett Till. You will be avenged. You will be remembered as long as men have tongues to cry against evil." The fact that a major motion picture has been released almost 70 years after the murder, I would say this is most certainly true. And as I said before, this is it. There's no further mention from Life magazine after this. Now, it does pop up in mainstream newspapers quite a bit, with all of them correctly emphasizing what is wrong with the situation at hand. The article from the Washington Post on October 4th, 1955. It draws another serious issue, which actually was not thoroughly evaluated by Jet magazine at the time. Now, see, they went into why there was an all-white, all-male jury. And this is because juries are made up of registered voters. So the NAACP wanted to figure out why not a single black person was registered to vote in that county. And a circuit clerk by the name of Charlie Cox goes on the record claiming that most of the Negroes had no desire to vote, and of the 5 or 6 who did, they could not fulfill a requirement adopted by a Mississippi legislator, which stated that applicants must demonstrate their knowledge of the Constitution to the satisfaction of the circuit clerk, who has charge of voter registration. And thus, in taking this step, Mississippi had handed over the power to deny any black person voting rights to a single person, a clerk. Now, this is what voter obstruction looks like. All that an individual had to say, who was a clerk, a very low-paid government employee, is just say, none of them could pass the test. There's no commentary on this in the article, but it draws attention to the issue at hand, and anyone who can read between the lines understands exactly what's wrong with this. Total control of justice, politics, budgets was the norm in Mississippi by excluding Negroes from all form of politics. Now, going back a bit to a Washington Post article from September 23, 1955, I saw information that one would never come across in the black media at the time. Mrs. Bryant, the woman at the center of the murder case, claimed that Emmett Till had grabbed her and made lewd comments about being with white women before the incident. To the credit of the judge running the case, he declared that this testimony was inadmissible for jury consideration because previous testimony about events at the store referred only to the boy doing the talking or saying things, never actually grabbing her. This article also goes into detail on how the sheriff, H.C. Strider, that was the guy who liked to say, "Good morning, niggas," He testified the body was pulled from the river and looked like it had been there for 10 to 15 days, which would make it impossible for it to be Emmett Till's body since he disappeared only 7 days earlier. Strider also goes on to say that he could not tell if the body was that of a Negro. So, as far as the specifics of Bryant's claim, she says that he grabbed her hand full force when she held it out for the money. She says that she turned away and then he caught her around the waist and said, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" The Negro also asked her for a date and uttered an unprintable word. He also bragged about having been with a white girl before. None of these claims were published in the black media. They only mentioned the wolf whistle. And years later, she would actually admit that she lied about this portion of her testimony. So at the end of the day, this is really the end. This is it. An ugly event. It goes unpunished. The murderers threatened witnesses, and many, many lives were destroyed. Now, in 1986, Ebony Magazine, the flagship magazine for the Johnson Media Company, came back to Sumner, Mississippi to see what had become of the town and of the main actors from 30 years previous. The author of this article had been reporting for Ebony Magazine during the murder trial and had moved to Stockholm, Sweden. She married a Swedish man and lived as an expat for the last 24 years. Now, she said that whenever she would compare life abroad to life in the United States, her mind would often drift back to that case. Many people had told her that life had gotten much better in Mississippi, a place that she referred to as the black man's mental Auschwitz, a reference to the German concentration camp for Jews. One of the events which stands out the most in her mind from 1955 is when she was sitting on the porch of Moses Wright a day before the trial was to begin, and a truck full of 4 to 5 white men bearing shotguns drove by and slowed down, and all the men glared at them menacingly, saying nothing. So anyway, she decided she would return to the town to see for herself what had changed. She runs through a lot of the changes she's seen around town and gives a quick status update on the major players in the Emmett Till drama from 1955. Carolyn and Roy Bryant divorced, as did J.W. Milam, the other suspect, and his wife. Moses Wright, the great uncle who fingered the killers in court, had died. He would have been 90 years old, so it kind of made sense. The other murderer, J.W. Milam, had died of cancer years before this article was written. They were unable to find Carolyn Bryant, but they did track down Roy Bryant. His grocery store had been unable to stay open after the trial because people stopped shopping there. So he had moved to another one a few towns over, and ironically, his grocery store was in a black neighborhood. Now, the article concludes with the following very optimistic take on things. It says, Mississippi has changed. A black visitor feels comfortable there. The signs are down, the shops are integrated. One never has to ask which elevator to board. The hotels are open to everybody, and the desk clerks even say, "Enjoy your stay, y'all come back." Blacks serve in the state legislature, the courts. There are black policemen, black state troopers, and hundreds of black civil servants, even in the Sumner courthouse, where the Emmett Till case was tried. But the biggest change I discerned during my brief visit to Mississippi was in the minds and the imagination of its black citizenry. Where there once was pessimism, now there is hope. This is going to be a state run by blacknecks and rednecks. That's what the teacher slash state representative who she interviewed for the final segment of her article said. Who 30 years ago would have dared make a prediction like that? History may prove me wrong, but I also believe that a great many ordinary, everyday white Mississippians feel relief that the years of turmoil are seemingly over, and that the day has finally come when they need no longer assert their whiteness all the time. The theory being that that's all the Emmett Till case was really about. They occupied a position in society. Emmett Till had violated the social order, and therefore he was killed. I believe that what happens in Mississippi is important. If Mississippi, with its legacy of racial strife, can be turned into a promised land, surely there is hope for the rest of the world. Now, this optimism is tempered by that same state representative who talked about blacknecks and redneck, answering a couple of her questions. She asked him whether or not he believes there has been change in the hearts and minds of white people, in parallel with the outward changes that she's witnessed. His response was, "I doubt it. We haven't won anything without lawsuits." She asked, "Do you think that whites as a group have learned anything from the past?" He says, "I wouldn't put my life on the line that they have. I think that the mentality is still there. And of course, this is one of the biggest challenges of being a black man in America. You know what's happened. You know that some white people still feel this way, but you have no way of knowing which ones feel that way and which ones do not, because they'll never tell you. And they will hide it as best they can because being racist is very unflattering nowadays." He talks about black lawyers being harassed by the Bar Association and the economic freeze-outs whenever big money is involved. These are patterns that you see almost everywhere today. In elite occupations where there is very small black minority with almost zero power, you will see bad things happening, like with black doctors and black lawyers. And when decisions are being made about distribution of resources, you will see favoritism given to folks who are more similar to whoever the decision makers are. But regardless of all this, I like what he said next, because this is what we must all do regardless. He says, I have no animosity towards anybody. Today I work with whites. I teach their children. I work in an integrated school, and in my teaching, I try to be absolutely sure that no child, black or white, can say that I didn't give them the very best that I had to give. This is the calling of all of us who understand the past. We retain the knowledge, but we do not let it corrupt our behavior or corrupt our heart. Do not return fire. Do not seek retribution against the innocent who had nothing to do with the events of the past. Now, once more in 2005, Ebony Magazine did another look back on the Emmett Till case. This time, they are 50 years in the future from that event. The story talks about a new federal investigation of the murder, which involved exhuming the body and attempts to hold someone accountable for the murders. It also mentions that both men confessed to the murders in a media interview about 1 year after being cleared of the charges. Images show Rosa Parks at the dedication of the street named after Emmett Till. Rosa Parks has gone on the record as saying that she was inspired by the Emmett Till story the day that she refused to move to the back of the bus. This here is an image of Simeon Wright, who was in the bed with Emmett Till the night he was taken, greeting family at the reinterment of the body after the federal investigation was completed. No additional charges were ever filed. Now, the final word on the entire story comes from a Washington Post article from July 2022, which is just 3 months ago. An old warrant for Carolyn Bryant's arrest was found in the basement of the courthouse, but the statute of limitations was 2 years for a kidnapping case, which is all she could really be charged with. They also mentioned that she wrote a book titled More Than a Wolf Whistle, where she claims that she never wanted him to be harmed, and that she begged for Emmett Till to be taken back to his house that night, and that her husband did everything against her will. She painted herself as a victim all of these years, and she's living out her final days in Kentucky at the age of 88. Although justice will never be served for Emmett in the form of a conviction, we can take comfort in the fact that his death had a very far-reaching impact on the lives of Black Americans with regards to drawing attention to our cause. Now, you may be asking, what do you do with Emmett Till's story now? It's 70 years in the past. Almost 70 years in the past. It was a bad thing that happened. Should you be angry? What are you supposed to feel? I no longer wish to be angry about this. And so my decision is that when I think about Emmett Till, my feeling will be gratitude. Not to Emmett Till necessarily for being killed, but I am grateful that his death was not meaningless. I'm grateful that because of his death, other Black men and women took a stand which meant their life was going to get a lot harder and their day-to-day was going to get more uncomfortable so that they could confront a system and eventually tear down a system that would have made my life just as miserable as theirs. So when I think of Emmett Till, I think I'm grateful for the people who used Emmett Till's death to launch a movement which gave me a better life. Sleep well, Emmett Till.